Bibles open there to 1 Samuel chapter 18. Or 17 is where you were. We're going to look at chapter 18. If you need notes, just hold your hand up. The men are ready to serve you with those. Flip back over to 1 Samuel chapter 18 and in verse number 14. And it says, "And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all of Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them." Other places in the Bible it talks about David's wise behavior. His wise behavior. Can't seem to get away from David. We're kind of studying more about David's life. I guess, studying about David because, as J. Vernon McGee would say, it's where the rubber meets the road. It's just down to life. It's just down to earth. David's highs in his spiritual life, they were very high. David's lows were very low. Murder and adultery and numbering the people. And so he's there. He's just a man, with the highs and with the lows. So we look at his highs, and it's something for us to aspire to. It's something else to focus on. It's something else to look to for training, for setting our own goals, to learn from. And his lows are something to keep us from getting down that low, to give us precautions and put up some barriers in our life to watch out for it. So tonight we're looking at David's wise behavior. David's wise behavior, that we can learn from that. We saw just a week or two ago about David's reputation. David's reputation. And the key to that was, we learned that even a child is known by his what class? Doings. Just what you do. Our testimony is based upon what we do. Here, David's wise behavior, because he behaved himself wisely in all areas of his life, at least at this time. There's a passage in the Bible that talks about challenging somebody to do after David's first behavior, his first works. Later on in his life, he had some difficulties. But here, he's behaving himself wisely. He's doing what's right, even as a young man. And so, we need to learn to behave wisely. We need to have that kind of testimony. We need to have that kind of life. And God gives us some things we see in this passage, a very familiar passage, that helps us learn about behaving wisely, conducting ourselves wisely, living wisely. But as we do that, it's going to take some dedication. We have to say, I want to dedicate myself to living wisely, to behaving wisely. It's going to take some desire that we want to do. By the way, most of us do what we want to do. When you get right down to it, we'll do what we want to do. If you want to make it to church, you'll make it to church. If you want to do this, you'll do that. If you don't want to do it, you won't. So when it gets down to it, in most cases, we just end up doing what we want to do. So we need that desire to behave wisely. And then we need to have that willingness, that terrible word again, change. Make the changes. Because none of us are behaving wisely in all areas, so we have to be willing to make the change. So tonight, the idea is we'll let God train us, moms and dads, so we can train our children, train our young folks. It would not hurt to take the notes even from tonight or last time about reputation and sit down and just keep it. And 3 months from now, 6 months from now, sit down with your kids and go over that again about reputation. Take those opportunities. When situations arise, when they get themselves in trouble at school or they find themselves, remind them about reputation, about doing, about character, and as we see tonight, about wise behavior. Just behaving ourselves. It's very, very simple. So tonight, let's let God speak to us. It's been a challenge to me. Maybe I'm the only one that needs it, but I know I need it, and hopefully it'll spill over to you about just behaving ourselves wisely. David's wise behavior. Again, it said in 1 Samuel 18:14, "And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid." So let's look at this wise behavior. Not deep, not hard, but certainly something we need to work on tonight. So it's very simple, some things about how to behave wisely. Number one, David behaved himself wisely in responsibility to his duty. In responsibility to his duty. Now, I have to remind us, duty is not a bad word. Duty is a good word. In fact, Jesus giving us an instruction, talking about the servants that did all that they've done. In Luke 17:10, Jesus said, "So likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you." He said, when you've done all the things that are commanded, not some, not most, not the easy, not the hard, but all those things, say, "We are unprofitable servants. We have done that which is our duty to do." So Jesus knows and reminds us about duty. Just duty. If you've been in the military, many times we just remind ourselves, we sign up and go in the military to do our duty. Sometimes, we don't like to admit this, but sometimes duty is the only thing that keeps us going. It should not be. Certainly there's higher motives, but many times it's just duty that gets us through the hard parts, that if it was not our dedication to duty, our acceptance of duty, we'd really mess up our lives. Yeah, if you've been saved in many years, if you've been married many years, there's going to be times, there'll be some days that sometimes you did some things rightly just because you knew it was your duty to do. But if you had not done your duty and walked out, if you had not done your duty and forgiven, if you had not done your duty and done the job, then the marriage would have maybe fallen apart and you would have not been able to go on and you not have the family that you have today. It may be in your workplace. You've just said, "It's just my duty. This is my duty. I wasn't crazy about it, but it was my duty." And that duty is what propels you to keep you going. Sometimes, many times, I think, even as pastors, sometimes it's just my duty. It's just my duty. I think I told you the story about not long ago about the lady that said to her husband, "Come on, you got to get up. We got to go to church." "I don't want to go to church." "You got to go to church." "I don't want to go to church." "Why don't you want to go to church?" "Those people don't like me. Nobody cares about me down there. I don't want to go to church." "You've got to go to church." "Why?" "Because you're the pastor." So it's just the duty to do it. It's just, you have to do that. So don't be afraid of duty. Don't say, but make sure the duty is what God has given to you. So here we find David behaving himself wisely in his responsibility to his duty. Again, many times it just keeps us going. Very quickly, as we look at David's duty, and we won't be able to look at all the verses, but just get the context of what we're doing. Number one, he did not fight his duty. He did not fight his duty. David's job here, as we find, let's put it in two aspects. Number one, he had an obligation to obey. He had an obligation to obey his father. He was the shepherd of the family. He was the youngest, and his job was to take care of the sheep. He was the shepherd. Remember when they were getting ready to anoint him as anoint the king? They went through all the brothers, and he said, there wasn't one. He said, "Have you got anybody else?" He said, "Yeah, my youngest. He's out in the field with the sheep." And so he came. That was his job. We find when he left Saul, he went back out taking his father's sheep. So he did not fight his duty. He had a duty to obey. He had an obligation to obey, to be the shepherd, an obligation to obey his father. It was his duty. That was just his job he was supposed to do. So his duty was to obey. Well, we just need to understand, a lot of times it's just our duty to just obey. And so he didn't fight his duty. We don't find anywhere in here where he says, "Dad, I'm tired of being a sheep. Let my brother do it. I'm going to be the next king. Let them do the shepherding." No, we don't find anywhere God's recorded for us that David argued with his father about doing that simple duty. He did not fight his duty, his obligation to obey. But he also had an obligation. He had a duty, not just an obligation to obey, but a duty to fulfill an opportunity to serve the king. You think about that. The king says, I need David to come play for me. I need David to come serve me. I need David to come before me. He saw that as his duty. I don't know anywhere in the Bible where it says David liked sheep. I don't know anywhere in the Bible where it says David loved being a shepherd. But it was his duty. It was his duty. And as I began thinking about that and meditating upon it, and I think about my life, we may not like the duty we have, But we can rejoice and we can make life so much better if we just enjoy the duty, doing the duty that we have. We may not like the duty we have, but we can like doing the duty we have. Are you listening to me? Does that make any sense? When we delight in doing our duty, when we delight in doing what's right, when we delight in doing what we ought to do, when we delight in saying, yes, I did the job the very best I could for the glory of God, with God's grace and God's strength, I did what I was supposed to do. I enjoyed doing my duty, even though the duty I did I was not really excited about. Again, going back to the military stance for those, there's lots of things you say, man, I don't like that, but I like doing my duty. I didn't like running up against the machine gun nest, but I did my duty. I didn't like cleaning out that area, but I did my duty. So you and I, by the way, that works in your homes also. That works in your marriage also. You may not like certain aspects of the marriage and doing that duty, but you can rejoice in the fact you're doing the duty God has given to you. So how you say, preacher, how in the world can I enjoy this job that God has given to me, or this job in this place I find myself in right now? Just delight in doing your God-given duty. That's why young folks, you say, you may not like obeying your parents in all things, but you can delight in doing your duty to God by obeying your parents. Again, husbands and wives in the church, whatever it is. So we can delight in the duty. So we may not enjoy the duty we've been assigned, but we can enjoy doing our duty. And that makes all the difference in the world. Say, that is my duty, and I'm pleased, and I'm honored, and I'm glad, and I'm rejoicing and delighting in the duty that I'm doing. Can I get a little help with that tonight? That will revolutionize your life. Right now, in this stage of my life, I don't like this duty. You may not like the duty of changing diapers. Do they even sell diapers anymore? I mean, real diapers. They got those pamper things. Anyway. But you can rejoice in doing your duty. So that'll change your ministry. That'll change your life. You say, this is my duty, so I'm going to delight and rejoice in doing my duty, even if the duty is something I'm not particularly crazy about. David may not have liked being out there with the sheep. He may not have particularly cared for you. Oh, he got upset when somebody stole the sheep. Remember the story that the preacher came? But he may not have cared for that, but he delighted in doing his duty. And so what we find, he did not fight his duty, his responsibility duty. He did wisely in all that he did. And at this stage of his life, that wasn't much except fighting Goliath and taking care of sheep, doing his duty. He did not fight his duty. Let's don't fight our duty. When we've been assigned a duty, don't fight it. Don't argue with it. You say, but I'm not really particularly glad about that duty. By the way, we all have stages in our life, and in every ministry, in every part of your life, you're going to have some jobs you don't particularly care. But if it's your duty, just delight in doing the duty. He did not fight in doing his duty. Number two, he did not forget his duty. He did not forget his duty. He did not forget his duty by distractions or delight. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse number 19. Now, this is after David was anointed to be the next king. Samuel didn't anoint him and say, I can't tell you what that's about. He didn't say, I know I got a little oil in your head, but someday I'll tell you. No, he knew what it was. His family knew what it was. He was anointed to be the next king. Down the road, it was done, it was sealed, it was anointed on him. But notice in verse number 19, when now Saul needs somebody to come play music, wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, send me David thy son, which is with the what class? Sheep. Even though he was anointed, he still went out tending to the sheep. The title did not change him. He was not distracted by now being anointed the next king and having the title of being the next king. He did not forget his duty. After the anointing, now they may have had a little party. They may have talked about what all that meant. But when all said and done, Daddy said, okay, David. David said, okay, back to the sheep. He didn't forget his duty. Not only did he return to the sheep after the anointing, he returned to the sheep after entertaining the king. After entertaining the king. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 15. So this is after he began to sing for him. It says, but David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. A position did not change him. It did not stop him. He still understood it was his duty to do until that duty was lifted from him, until somebody else came along and said, that's not your duty anymore. That's not your responsibility anymore. That's not your job anymore. He went ahead and continued it. He did not forget his duty. It's amazing how we can forget our duty. We can get distracted. Certain things come along and say, wow, things are different now. I guess I don't have to do my duty. As long as you've got that duty, it's still your duty. He did not forget his duty. He conducted himself wisely. He behaved himself wisely in the fact that he was, regarding his responsibility to duty. He did not fight his duty. He did not forget his duty. It's amazing with sometimes we as adults and sometimes, many times as teenagers or children, I forgot. Did you clean up your room? I forgot. Listen, I've been telling you to clean up your room every day, 3-4 times a day for the last 10 years. Don't tell me you forgot. Husbands, the wife says, did you put your socks into dirty clothes? Aye. Liar, liar, pants on fire. But let's don't forget, all right? Let's don't. That's scripture. That's in Hezekiah 5:2, all right? Let's don't forget duty. So he did not fight his duty. He did not forget his duty. Number next, he did not forsake his duty. He did not forsake his duty. Well, the simple thing of duty, and David, he behaved himself wisely. One, because he just knew about carrying forth and he was responsible for his duty. He did not forsake his duty just because something new was assigned. 1 Samuel 17, verse number 20. And we've seen this before, but it's so important for me to remember, I've got to do my duty the best I can, always for the glory of God. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 20. His dad now says, verse number 20, and Jesse took an ass laden with bread and a bottle of wine with the kid, and sent by David his son unto Saul. Oh, I'm in the wrong chapter. No wonder. All right. Good. So now he says, shame on you. No, all right, so thank you. Well, chapter 17, verse number 20. And David arose early in the morning, so he's told to go take this food to your brothers and go check on your brothers. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep and took and went as Jesse had said. Did I miss something? He left the sheep, what class? With the keeper. With the keeper. Even though he had a new job, even though he had a new responsibility, he said, I want you to go. Dad says, David, I want you to take this over to the war. I want you to take this to the battle and go check on your brothers and take this to their leaders and be a blessing to him. Take this cheese with him. But when he left, he did not say, I guess somebody else will cover it. He didn't say, I guess if God gave me, if my dad told me to do this, my dad will get somebody else to cover it. No, he held on as responsibility, being responsible for his duty to the sheep. He left them with a keeper. He had somebody else assigned. By the way, the keeper now has a responsibility. The keeper now has a duty. Sometimes we forget about the keeper. The keeper now, he says, I got a new job. It's now my responsibility while David is gone. But he did not forsake it, even though he has a new job, even though he had something new to do. Verse 22. So now he's got the stuff over there and he's taking it in. Verse 22, and David left his carriage in the hand of the, what class? Keeper of the carriage, and ran to the army. So he had somebody carrying not just for the sheep, but also for the stuff. I mean, he's in enemy territory. He just can't leave his stuff there. So he left it with the keeper. So he did not forsake his duty. He made sure his duties were covered. He made sure his duty was he was still responsible for them. Boy, let's learn not to fight our duty, not to forget our duty, and let's don't forsake our duty. It's still our duty. And so all God's people said, amen. So that's just behaving wisely, being responsible to our duty. He didn't assume somebody else would take care of it. He didn't assume somebody else did. Let's check our duties. David behaved himself wisely in his responsibility to his duties. Number 2, David behaved himself wisely in response to disincentives. In his response to disincentives. In other words, he wasn't always encouraged in everything he did. I don't know why we think we ought to be encouraged by everybody all the time. It's not going to happen. There'll be things that happen to your life that will discourage you. There'll be things in your life that will not give you incentive to keep going. Have you figured that out? Not everything in life says, boy, this is great. I'm going to just keep doing right. I'm just going to keep doing right. No, there's going to be opposition to that. And we see David's response to disincentives. Boy, how quick we give up. How quick we quit. How fast we cry. I'm not putting down the fact that we have heartache sometimes and difficulty, but we're too quick to give up, to stop because somebody didn't encourage us. I can't remember who said it first, but character, a man's or woman's character is often measured by what it takes to stop us. What does it take to make you stop? What does it take to make you quit? What is it? How much does it take before you quit? How much before you stop doing what is right? A little pushback, a little difficulty, a little grief, and we're gone and we're done. Very quickly, let's look how he responded to disincentives, things that are stopping him from doing what is right. Number one, we find his brothers disparaging. His brothers disparaging. Look at chapter 17, verse 28. And Eliab, his elder brother. Anybody here ever have trouble with your brother? Yeah. Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, I'm glad you're here. I hope you can go fight Goliath, and I hope... No. Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride, and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. We see his brothers disparaging him. By the way, often our disparaging can come from family. So often it comes from family. So often it might come from a spouse. So often it might come from a church member. Let's pause and step to the side. Don't let us be the one that's disparaging, though. Don't let us be the one that tears down. It's so easy. This old mouth, this old tongue can get us in so much trouble and can hurt so many people. But it came from the family. It comes from somebody close. But notice his disparaging. He criticized his character. He criticized his conduct. He criticized him as about being carnal. Notice what again it says. This is what he said to him. And think about it. David's doing his duty. David is doing just what he's done. He did his duty to make sure his sheep was covered. He's obeying his dad's orders. He made sure that the stuff in the carriage, in the chariot was being taken care of. And now he's doing it. And all of a sudden here comes his brother. And his brother says, Why comest thou now hither? With whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? He said, did you do your job? Did you do your duty? Did you take care of the things you're supposed to? What are you doing here when you've got a job over there? I know thy pride. He says, you're a prideful little man. You're a prideful little brother. You've got so much pride in you. That's why I know that you're here. And I know the naughtiness of thine heart. I have no idea what he was referring to, but his older brother says, you've got a naughty heart. You've got a prideful heart. You didn't do your job. Wow. Just the carnality. He said, you're just here because you think it's exciting. You're just coming down to see the battle. Ladies and gentlemen, there may be times in your life when you're trying to do things right for God and doing your duty that somebody close to you is liable to come and tell you the same thing. Well, you're naughty. You're prideful. You really think you're something. You're just in it for yourself. Though it's not that at all. But notice David's response. And again, this is the key. How we respond to the difficulties, how we respond to the disincentives. Notice David's controlled response. By the way, you better control your response. Yeah, most of us, if our brother said something like that, we'd say, oh yeah, come here and I'll show you about the sheep. Come here and I'll show you about the naughtiness of my heart. I'll show you, I got something to be prideful about. Come over here, brother, I'll show you. That's what we would have done. But David's controlled. By the way, you need to control your response. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many of us have difficulty sometimes in controlling our response? The Bible tells us, Proverbs 16:32, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh the city. Well, I'm such a strong Christian. All right, watch your spirit. Watch your anger. Proverbs 25:28, he that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down without walls. Notice David's controlled response. He behaved himself wisely in all things. Why? because he knew his responsibility, his duty, but also his response to his disincentives. First of all, we don't see, his brother got angry. We don't see him angry, but we see him ask the questions and make an inquiry. Boy, don't answer back angrily. He did say, what have I done? Is there not a cause? But he asked questions. He brought inquiry. He did not get angry. As far as we can tell, I don't see it as an argumentative response. He didn't say, oh yeah? Well, let me tell you. No, he was not arguing. He just challenged to do right. He said, isn't there a cause? Isn't there something we're supposed to be doing? And he wasn't arrogant. He was humble. He was not better than himself. He didn't feel like himself being better than anybody else. He was just setting the example. So he had a controlled response. When his brother came and was disparaging to his character, David, a man after God's own heart, who had good character, but he says, boy, he was down about his character and about his conduct and about his carnality. But David's response was right. Secondly, we find disincentives, not just from his brother, but also we see Saul's discouragement. Saul's discouragement. Chapter 17, verse 33, and we must hurry. So Saul heard about David saying, we ought to go stop this guy. We ought to go take care of this guy. Verse 33, and Saul said to David, thou art not able to go up against this Philistine. He says, you can't do it. He said, David, you can't do it. You're not able. You are not equipped. You're not man enough. You're not able to do that, to fight with him. For thou art but a youth. He says, you're just a kid. But he a man of war from his youth. So he finds Saul discouraging him about his arrogance. He says, you can't do it. You think you can, but you can't. About his age, about his abilities, his skills he has. He says, you don't have the skills, you don't have the wherewithal, you don't have the age, you're just arrogant and thinking that you can even do that. There's going to be times in your life trying to serve God and do right, you're going to get that kind of discouraging talk. Notice David's response. Again, that's what we're talking about, the response. You're going to get it. We can't stop getting the discouragement. We can't stop getting the disparaging, but we can control our response to it. Notice, first of all, he remembered and rehearsed his training. He remembered and rehearsed his training. Look at verse 34. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he defied the armies of the living God. And David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. So we find he rehearsed and remembered his training and his trials. David said, when he heard that, his response was, well, wait a minute. By the way, David may have thought a little bit, you're kind of right. I'm just a kid and he's a big warrior. He's been there doing this for a long time. But he said, wait a minute. He says, I've got some training. I've got some trials. I've got some things that went on. But notice it was private training and trials. Far as we know, nobody else was out there with David when the bear and the lion came. No, far as we know, nobody was out there when he went after the bear and the lion. See, they already had it. He said, but I went after him. I went after them. It was my duty to protect them. So I went out after them. As far as we can tell, as far as we know, there was nobody else in there. So it's, the preacher once said, it's private training and private trials for public leadership. Private training, private trials for public leadership. When David was out there, see, he did right, and he did bravely, and he had courage when nobody else saw. When nobody else was going to see, he did right. When nobody else saw, he had courage. He didn't say, well, I've got to do it because people are watching. No, he said, there's nobody else out here. Just me and God and the bear, just me and God and the lion. He said, so he was doing right. He was doing courageously, even though nobody else saw. He did right and he did courageous, even when he thought at that time nobody else would find out. He did not know that he was going to use that as an opportunity one day to say to the king, no, I've had some tests. I've had some trials. Let's just do right when nobody else sees. Let's be brave. Let's be courageous when we think nobody else will find out. And just do it. So we've got that. He rehearsed and remembered his training and his trials. When he got the discouragement, he said, wait a minute, no, God is blessed. He said, no, God has done some things. God has worked some things in my life. God has shown me some things. God has allowed me to do some things. You say, preacher, well, but they said that you don't have the equipment to do it. You don't have the wherewithal. You can say, wait a minute. You can think to your own self and let God and the Holy Spirit remind you. No, I went through some trials before. No, I went through some difficulty before. No, I've made some stands before and God brought me through. So let's remember. Our response ought to be to remember what God has done, the retraining and trials that we had, and also His resolve just to trust God. And that's what verse 37 is. He just said, but I'm going to trust God on top of that. He said, and David said, moreover, the Lord delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the bear. So he just decided, I'm just going to resolve to trust God. So when you get discouraged, somebody comes and tries to discourage you, just think about what God has already done in your life and just decide you're going to trust God. Then we find Goliath's disdain. Goliath's disdain. By the way, we ought to expect that from the enemy. Amen? We ought to expect that from the world. You ought to expect that from the enemy. And that's what we find. Goliath, chapter 17, verse 42. The enemy comes. Yeah, you wouldn't expect it maybe from your brothers, but you can kind of expect it sometimes from your brothers. You wouldn't expect it from the one who's your leader, the one who's your boss, the one you're trying to say. But that's where it came from. But you do expect it from the enemy, and that's what we find here. Goliath's disdain. Verse 42. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him. He just ridiculed him. He tried to just put him down. He said, you are nothing. For he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog, that thou comest me with staves? You coming after me with a stick like you would a dog? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So we find Goliath disdained him, just really put him down. He wasn't just discouraging him, he was disdaining him. He was ridiculing him. By the way, that's what the devil will do to you. The devil wants to ridicule you. He wants to disparage you. He wants to disdain you. He disdained David for his countenance. He said, that's what he said, his countenance, just the way he looked. He was a good-looking young man. He says, you're too good-looking for this. I know that problem. He said, you're just too good looking. He said, it's just disparaging. He disdained him for his coming. He said, you come out with a stick. He said, you have no talents, you have no skills. And he disdained him with a curse. Just cursed him by his gods. Yeah. I think David, in going after this place that God has him going after Goliath, I think he'd have some reasons to be disincentivized. His own brother disparaging his character. His leader discouraging him. The enemy disdaining him. Very quickly, David's response. That's the key. It's not what they say. It's not what the devil does. It's our response to it that makes us behave wisely. Notice David's response. First of all, he remembered his captain. He remembered his captain. Verse 45. Back at verse 44, Philistine went on, and Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh to the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. So boy, he just disdained him. That's God's word for what he did. Verse 45, then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with the sword and with the spear and with the shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. And this day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee and take thy head from thee, and I will give it to the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day, and to the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth. Boy, what he did, his first response, he remembered his captain. He remembered his captain. He remembered God. He said, I'm coming to you in the name of God. I'm coming to you to my Savior. I'm coming to you by the God of Israel. He remembered his captain. Here's the key. I don't see him taking it personally. He said, I'm not taking it personally. I'm coming in the name of God. Listen, when the devil goes after you and I, when the devil starts criticizing, don't take it personal. Just remember the captain. Don't say, oh, he's hurting my feelings and I'm going to get upset. No! Just go and remember your captain. Remember the captain who's leading you. Remember who we're doing it for, the duty we're doing for. So he remembered the captain. He didn't take it personally, but not only did he remember the captain, here's our response we need also, he raised the cause. He rallied around that cause, verse 46. And to the wild beasts of the earth. Why? That all the earth may know there is a God in Israel, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands. So he raised the cause. Two causes. He said, this is what I'm going to do. He said, Goliath, I hear you disdaining me. I hear you tearing me down. I hear you criticizing me and just giving me disdain. He says, but I'm not taking it personally, but I do want to remember my captain that I'm serving, and I wanted to remember the cause. The two causes. Number one, that all may know. Notice what he says. That all the earth may know there is a God in Israel. He said, I want everybody else to know there's a God. I know there's a God. I know whom I'm serving. I know who I'm loving. I know who I'm going after. But I want all the world to know. And they're going to know it when He defeats you. When God and I defeat you, they're going to know it. The cause is that all the earth may know. Preacher, why should I go ahead and fight against this old enemy when my brothers are against me, when my leaders are sometimes against me, and when certainly the devil is deceiving? Why should I go on? Because people need to know there's a God. People need to know that God's still on the throne. Listen, the folks out there still need to know there's a God. They don't believe in God. They don't want to know about God, but they need to know there is a God, and we do that by our response to the disincentives. If we quit, if we fall apart, if we go ahead and respond inappropriately, then they're going to say, I can do that. They've got nothing that I don't have. But we need to go ahead and for the cause that all the earth may know, and I like this one, so the army may go. So the world may know, and so the army may go. Notice what it says. Latter part of verse 46, that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel. He said, that's what I'm coming for. And this assembly, what assembly? His fellow soldiers, shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. Remember, they're all afraid. They've been cowering over there on the other side of the valley, and they've been afraid. He says, I want them to know that it's not their spears and swords, it's God. I want them to know they can go ahead and keep coming. I want them to know that there is victory in the Lord. I want them to know that God's still on the throne. His response to disincentives. He behaved wisely. Why? Because his response was right. Lastly, and very quickly, David behaved himself wisely in his race to his destiny. In his race to his destiny. I don't use that in a mystical way, but David was going to be the next king. He was already anointed the next king, and his job right here was to kill Goliath. I mean, you're talking about, if people out there in the world know anything about David, they'll know he's the guy that killed Goliath with the rock. They may not know why, they may not know the story, they may not know, but they'll know that. He's on his way to destiny, defeating Goliath, and therefore put him in a place. So later on when he goes to battle, they said, he's the one that killed Goliath. He's the one that killed Goliath. We know about him. He's the one that killed Goliath. That was his destiny, and that helped him so much in his life. But notice his race to do it. He did not hold back. He did not limit himself. Look at verse 22. Chapter 17, verse 22. And we'll be done. Almost. And Jesse said unto David his son, take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp of thy brethren. Verse 22, I think I jumped a verse. Verse 22, and David left the carriage in the hand of his keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and saluted his brethren. He ran to his fellows. He ran to his fellows. He says, man, here I come. Here, fellas, I'm here. What can I do for you? I've got some food for you. I want to see how it's going. He ran to his fellows. He didn't run just to go watch who were on. He ran to his brother. He ran to the fellows. He ran to, you know what, you say, preacher, what can we do? Let's run to our fellows. Let's run to the other brethren. Let's run to be a part. Don't run away from them. Run toward them. Don't run away from church. Run toward church. Don't run away from fellowshipping with the saints, but run toward them. The problem is we get all wrapped up in ourselves instead of wrapped up in other folks, and we do not run to the fellows. So he raced to his destiny. How do you know? He ran to his fellows. He didn't say, well, I guess I got to go hang out with them. I guess I got to. No, he ran to them. He ran to his fellows. Verse 46. This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee and take thy head from thee. And I will give thy carcass to the host of the Philistines this day, to the fowl of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know, and I'm not in the right verse. Where is it he ran toward Goliath? 48? And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. He ran to the fight. He didn't just run to his fellows, but then he ran to the fight. Boy, I'm glad we can run to the fight. We can run to the fight for the cause of faith. We can run to the fight for the cause of Jesus Christ. We can run to the fight. Oh, I know that we're going to be out, but just run to it. Don't run from it. He ran to the fight, and then he ran to his finish. And I love this. Look at verse number 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with the sling and with the stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. He ran to finish. He didn't say, whoop, he fell. I slung the rock, and he fell down. That's good enough for me. No, he said, I got to finish the job. I'm going to go and make sure everybody knows. I'm going to cut off his head, and I'm going to hold it up. We'll send the head to the king. He went to finish the job. He ran to finish. We stop too soon, folks. We stop too soon many times. Let's run to finish. That destiny of standing there holding that head of Goliath, wow, and giving it to the king. That was his destiny. That was what he needed to do. And he ran to the finish. Philippians 3:13. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth to those things that are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Man, just press. Just press. Just press. Just race to the finish. Keep on running. Keep on pushing. Don't let down. 2 Timothy 4:7, I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. His race to destiny. He behaved himself wisely in all areas. Wow. His duty. His disincentives, that response. He just responded wisely. And then his race to finish the job. Wow. We quit too easy. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. Let's be wise. Let's bow our heads, please.